Hello and welcome. You're watching Oneindia News. This is our weekly show, Global Chit Chat, where we discuss the top developments in the geopolitics in the recent week with our expert, Mr. Tridivesh Singh Maini. Hello, sir. Welcome back to our show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, sir, let's just dive right into it. On Monday, the White House said in US that it believes that Russia is turning to Iran to get hundreds of unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he said that Iran had already provided a number of unmanned systems to Russia. And he said that the US has that information, and it indicates that Iran is preparing to train Russian forces to use them as soon as this month. So what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that this statement holds any validity to begin with, or what do you think is going to happen in this regard?
See, first of all, there are two sets of Iranian reactions at the official level. So the Iranian foreign minister denied the fact that that Iran will be providing Russia with drones, and he categorically said that Iran doesn't want to be party to this conflict, and he criticized the conflict as well. So that's one part of it. The other is that there is no denial, and what has been said is one of the diplomats actually said that Iran has had defense cooperation with Iran way before the Ukraine conflict. So that response was rather ambiguous. It wasn't yes or no, but it was just that we've had close defense cooperation with Russia even before the conflict. And as a matter of fact, Iran and Russia are in the midst of negotiating a 20-year agreement, a strategic agreement along the lines of the 25-year agreement, which has been signed with China. So this obviously, even this agreement, the Iran-Russia agreement, also has a stronger strategic component. And now the timing is very important. Uh, if this is true, first of all, it comes around the same time as the US President Joe Biden is in the Middle East, something which we'll be discussing later on. And obviously, uh, it is a sort of posturing that if you can make your choices, and if the US is actually making a course correction foreign policy, then we are also free. And obviously, as I said earlier, Iran in any case has been moving closer to not just China but even Russia in recent years. This happened more after the 2018, after the US withdrawal from the JCPOA. Now, obviously, Iran is uncertain about what is going to happen. And in any case, Iran-Russia ties have been strong, and even in the midst of this crisis, you've had visits. For instance, the head of the Iranian central bank, he visited Russia last month. They discussed issues, uh, pertaining to banking, and how and Iran, both Iran and Russia have also been discussing, because Iran has managed to circumvent sanctions. So Russia has been seeking to learn from Iran as to how to circumvent the sanctions. So that is one other area where they've been trying to find common ground. So the drone part is, as I said, the US has made this comment, and obviously it's based on certain information. But I think a lot, as I said, we've been discussing earlier also, in foreign policy, a lot of things are symbolic and about posturing. But certainly, Iran has sensed that the scope for the revival of the nuclear deal is minimal, and so it needs to obviously keep its options open. And apart from the Middle East angle, we obviously need to mention that next week the Russian president will also be meeting both the Iranian president as well as Erdogan from Turkey. So I think that will also be there's going to be there'll be a trilateral over Syria, what is called the Astana format, and then Putin will probably have bilaterals, obviously, with the Iranian president as well as Erdogan. So I think geopolitics is becoming sort of more complex. But one thing is clear, that both, from the signaling of the past few weeks, that both Iran, Tehran, and Washington are losing patience as far as the nuclear agreement of 2015 is concerned. Getting back to the table and sort of reviving that, perhaps because of for various reasons. I mean, Iran cannot give up certain conditions, which we'll discuss just now, and then obviously Biden's diminition political capital.
Right. And do you think this can lead to some sort of a polarization of powers right now in this current scenario?
Yes, it
Because
will. The only
mm,
thing is that Iran will not. What is the difference? Probably would be that even if, let's say, there's no return to the
mhm,
2015 deal, I think the US will leave enough space for certain countries to have economic relations, and especially as far as oil is concerned, in the midst of this crisis, they will have to
mm,
give. Already, countries are buying oil from Iran, and in fact countries are buying oil. I mean, India is one example, even buying oil from Russia. So the US will have to give some space for economic
mm,
linkages with Iran, and Iran has figured that out. So Iran, the anti-US may not necessarily mean anti-West or anti those countries which are close to the US. So Iran will have
right.
to do a balancing act in that sense.
Right, right. And speaking of Joe Biden, he is in Israel currently, and on Thursday he said that US will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. He stands on that, and he believed that diplomacy remained the best avenue to keep the nation from obtaining one. Right. So there were Israeli objections in that regard. Correct. So what can you elaborate on this development? This entire Joe Biden's visit in Israel and him being in Middle East during this period of time.
So I think first of all, obviously, from the if one looks at it from the US foreign policy point of view, he's in a way he's ensuring that the because domestically a lot of people were critical of the way he had handled the realists in the US were critical of the way he was handling US
Mm,
ties with Saudi Arabia. So
mhm,
obviously, we've discussed that repeatedly that one is
yeah.
a course correction vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia. Though he has had to say that human rights will be part of the conversation, and that basically the crown prince will be part of the Saudis sort of group, and he won't be the only one. He's clarified that because earlier he had said he had refused to talk to MBS only, and unlike the US president, the previous president Donald Trump, who had a very good relationship with MBS. So that is one thing he'll have to balance out. But the priority of the visit is there are we'll come back to Iran, but the priority of the visit is
Mm,
essentially ensuring taking forward the Abraham Accords. And if you look yesterday, also there was a conversation, between four countries, basically
mm,
India, UAE, Israel, and the US. So it's taking that forward, and it's also about coming up with a similar arrangement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Now, whether it is ditto to that or not, that depends upon other factors. But already there is talk about enhancing the air connectivity, greater
mhm,
economic linkages, like we discussed earlier, flights. So that is one part of it. The second is, if you look at the first leg of the visit, if you look at Israel, obviously
mm,
Biden wanted to also send out the right message to is again reaching out to the lobby, which is tilts towards the
mm,
right, or you can call the hawks, not just the Republicans, those within the Democrats also, so that to ensure that there's a sort of balance, and so the message was very clear that there'll be continuity, and obviously Israel is a valued ally of the US, and there was discussion of the Palestine issue also. But
mm,
first of all, the focus was on the importance of the US-Israel relationship, and then uh, is if you look at the conversation between the Israeli PM and Joe Biden, the Israeli PM took a more aggressive stance vis-a-vis Iran. So now,
mm,
what is interesting is Biden, as you said, first of all, he said that the diplomacy is the best way, but Biden also said in I think in the conference, in the joint press conference after the meeting, that basically US cannot wait forever for Iran
mm,
as far as nuclear
mm,
is concerned. So that was one part. Second was obviously that they'll use what if necessary. If Iran goes nuclear, then obviously that they have to use force. And Israel was more strident in that, and it categorically said that even if you sort of the 2000 basically Israel didn't really say it's opposed to this sort of deal, but it did say that there should be harsher sanctions and uh, there should be some deterrent to Iran, and otherwise, if there's no deterrent, Iran could be a threat to
Mm.
regional security. So I think this was along predictable lines, but probably the hope for the Iran nuclear deal and for Iran-US relations is the fact that the US president still spoke about a small window of
Mm.
opportunity as far as Iran was concerned, and also that he took a slightly different line. Now, whether behind the scenes, this during his visit to Israel and then to Saudi Arabia, he is also creating some sort of pitch, for the revival of the deal. We may think that there's very little scope left, but one doesn't know about diplomacy, and one doesn't know about the back channel communication and so on and so forth. But certainly, it is a change.
Mm.
Because obviously Israel, Biden gave priority from no US president can afford to not give priority. But Saudi Arabia, certainly the policy was very different, and suddenly it's witnessed a drastic shift in 4 5 months. So, and one of the reasons for this, for the change, for the deterioration of ties, apart from the bilateral issues, was obviously Iran. The Iran
Mm.
nuclear deal as well. When it looks at the US Saudi dynamic, but on the whole, I think the Middle East is extremely. There are a lot of opportunities for the US, and it's also, as far as Israel is concerned. Obviously, the ties with the GCC countries have been improving, but
Mm.
the Israel-Iran relationship remains a major challenge,
Right.
and balancing that out is going to be tough. I don't think though that that ultimately the US will not only go by what Israel says, but obviously that's an important component. I mean, they cannot ignore that. And
Yeah.
also, even if the US want and other countries want a revival of the deal,
Mhm.
if Israel ups the ante vis-a-vis Iran, and Iran also
Mhm.
continues to do so vis-a-vis certain, Gulf countries and to some extent vis-a-vis Israel, then the revival of the deal is going to become much
Difficult.
tougher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And coming back to South Asian countries, as you know that Sri Lanka is still currently going through an intensely massive protest. It's seen massive protests all over the country, and the condition deteriorated as the president fled the country. So they're saying the advent of the crisis is obviously an inability to fund and purchase goods and services from abroad, right? So tell us what the other South Asian countries can learn from their mistakes or their patterns so that to avert such crisis.
See, it's not an immediate I mean, one can't say it would be a bit of an exaggeration, but
Mm-hmm.
excessive economic dependence upon one country, that is
Mm-hmm.
China. I
China.
mean, that is not visible at all. That's the first thing, and the rigidity to
Mm-hmm.
begin with vis-a-vis IMF also. So obviously, I mean, there are problems with the Western multilateral institutions and all that. But you have to have multiple options. I mean, look at Pakistan. They're looking at Gulf countries. They're looking at IMF. They're looking at China. So you have to have. But I mean, Pakistan is everybody's saying that Pakistan could be the next Sri Lanka. So probably it has learned the lessons that it should not only depend upon China and it should go to IMF and all that.
Right.
So I think the first is having good relations, a balanced foreign policy, something which the previous government, before the Rajapaksas took over,
Rajapaksha.
had was
Mm-hmm.
looking to improve ties with
Mm-hmm.
not just with India, with US, with Japan, and I mean they had good ties already, but economically also to strengthen the relationship. So it and I mean somewhat. I mean you can say the Bangladesh model in that sense in South Asia has been successful, in navigating all these foreign policy challenges and balancing them out.
Mm-hmm.
The second is obviously, if you have one source of, I mean, if you're for instance, Sri Lanka was excessively dependent upon tourism.
Right.
That was a major problem. So you need to diversify your economy. Now the other thing was that Sri Lanka moved to organic farming. When the foreign exchange reserves fell, it thought that
Mm-hmm.
then that way then you won't have to sort of import fertilizers and all. Now what organic
Right.
farming did was then your rice production went down. Then that
Yeah.
also led to inflation of rice, and other essential, agricultural commodities and all that. So there were major mistakes in that. Now, this was this these the policy failures were exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, because obviously tourism was not drop in tourism. Nobody had anticipated that the COVID-19 pandemic would happen.
Right.
The drop
Mm-hmm.
has been because of that. Then you've had obviously the Ukraine crisis also, because it was
Yeah.
there were Sri Lanka, like other countries, was importing essential
Mm-hmm.
commodities, like especially like uh, essential agricultural commodities from Ukraine. Now that was a major problem which they faced. So it's basically this problem has been over a period of time. I think the dependence upon China, for instance, people have been talking about a decade.
Mm-hmm.
The debt trap vis-a-vis China, though I think that, to be fair, if you look at the total debt, Sri Lanka,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just to China. There are other external
Countries.
debts also. So China
Right.
can't be blamed for external debt, but a number of the projects, the infrastructure projects, will actually they've turned out to be white elephants. They have not
Right.
shown the results. Uh, then, as I said, when you had this, when this period was there, uh, these 3 4 years, okay, focus on infrastructure. Some other areas could have also been given a boost. Now, I think, to be fair, again, the service sector normally is the best bet. But now, in a situation like COVID-19, one we've spoken about tourism, even things like information technology, uh,
Correct.
that also is what. So, what do South Asian countries, if you look at it, IT,
Mm-hmm.
textiles, these are some of the main areas, where most of South Asian countries. Now, I think, simply put, the lack of diversification in terms of the economy was the major problem, and then finally also, excessive political
Dependence.
centralization. If you
Right.
don't give space to different voices, which but these issues would have been red flagged, but
Mm-hmm.
excessive centralization also meant that a lot of voices weren't being heard. So I think, one, to respect, to ensure that the social fabric is intact and pluralism of views, pluralism of all sorts is
Mm-hmm.
respected. And that is something which, Sri Lanka, even other countries in South Asia also, in different ways, are facing this challenge. So I think
Right.
pluralism and diversity is not a liability; it is an asset.
Mm-hmm.
It may at times impede the pace of, uh, what people define as growth, but if you keep that intact, your at least your development, your strides forward, they're sustainable over a period of time. You know
Right.
that is very important.
Right,
Right.
right. And that, thank you so much for the information that you've imparted today. And also, just one more question regarding this entire scenario. This, in terms of export, when it comes to Sri Lankan exports, what can you tell that the country has been doing in terms of export, or rather not doing, because of the situation right now, the economic crisis that it is facing right now? What can you tell us about Sri Lankan exports?
So I think in the 1980s, for instance, see, first, after independence, there was a for some time there was a drop in exports, and then then Sri Lanka again followed a liberalized policy. So then, in things, for instance, tea was
Mm-hmm.
one of the major exports from the 1980s. China has been doing quite well in that. Sri Lanka has been doing rather well in exports of tea. In recent years, also, that has been there. I mean, tea has been doing reasonably well. But
Right.
uh, apart from that, the other problem has also been that still, as the economy has grown, as like other countries in South Asia, the dependence upon imports of certain commodities has been so much. So, for instance, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's energy, whether it's your certain foodstuffs, that way the imports, to keep pace with that, you have needed
Mm-hmm.
there has been need for much more diversification, and that hasn't really happened. So for very long there was a belief that, in the interim, that till
Mm-hmm.
Sri Lanka can give a further boost to exports, tourism would be the sort of safety valve, or the service
Right.
sector would be the safety valve. That hasn't
Right.
happened. And it's not the as far as the exports are concerned, it's not that the government has not made an attempt, but the areas which it has looked at, for instance, organic farming, I think
Mm-hmm.
That has been one of the
Good
major
to hear.
failures. And secondly, also the global situation,
Mhm.
especially with the disruption of supply chains and so on and so forth. Whatever exports were there, they have also been hit massively.
Right. Okay, so thank you again, sir, for all the information. That's all the time that we have for today. And everybody, thank you for watching One India News. Do catch us next week on Global Chit Chat. Thank you for watching.